Welcome to our third session of the course on leadership. After having worked for a few months in my job as provost in the university, I became aware of the discouragement and the frustration with faculty that we didn't have a organized faculty senate and a system of what the faculty would call shared governance. After a year in the provost office, I tried to find out ways that I could meet this particular felt need of the faculty and help them to get a better sense of participation and well-being in the leadership of the university. So in the retreat in the first summer, I presented to the faculty 3 different alternatives of revising our present structure to provide a more effective system of governance for the university. Because none of those were a faculty senate, they were not well received by those who wanted a senate, and we discussed the issue for a while, and then the matter kind of fell in the background as we went on with other more pressing issues. The interesting thing about this is that both the faculty and I looked at the solution to that problem as a structural solution. If we were going to have shared governance, we had to change somehow the structure that we were involved in. As we look at our reading for today, we're going to be considering Bowman and Deal as they deal with the issue of structure and other approaches to the study of complex organizations. If you've done the reading, you know that Bowman and Deal start with 4 basic approaches to the study of management, and the structural approach is just the first one of those 4. Today we'll be discussing both the first and the second approaches, the structural and the human resource approach, and evaluating their particular relevance for the solving of organizational and leadership problems. Bowman and Deal tell us that most often in organizations people try structural change to solve their problems. But oftentimes it's not the structure that's the problem. There are other complex parts of behavior that are the issue. As we think about this from a Christian perspective, sometimes we are just like everyone else in the world and we would take a structural solution. But in fact, the scriptures show us that Jesus was quite often critical of the social structures of his time, and he emphasized some of the human resource or character issues in terms of understanding leadership. For example, in Luke chapter 16, in the parable of the shrewd manager, Jesus tells the story of a manager who was fired. And before he left his job, he went about reducing the bills of all the people who owed money to his master so that he could have relationships when he left the job. Jesus said that the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted so shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than they are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Jesus then concludes with character issues. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be trusted with much. Character issues are really crucial in leadership. Dealing with other people, as this shrewd manager did, and helping them to meet their needs is a critical part of leadership. That's what we're going to address tonight. I hope you enjoy the class. Okay, our session for tonight is on page 25 in your syllabus. It's entitled Lecture Discussion 5, Leaders versus Leadership. I'm skipping the 4th one, you'll notice, and the reason I'm doing that is because we really don't have time to take the time to discuss that in class. However, if some of you like to get together sometime and discuss that chapter in my book, Transforming Culture, I'd be glad to do that. Tonight we're moving on to a different set of material. Your reading is from this book by Bowman and Deal, Modern Approaches to Understanding and Managing Organizations, and we'll spend quite a bit of time discussing that book this evening. Before we do that, however, I'd like to begin with an introductory lecture to set the framework for you for the things that will follow for us throughout the remainder of this course. I think it's very helpful to make a distinction between leaders and leadership. Leaders are people. Leadership is a process of interacting with other people, attempting to get them to follow. If we think for a moment about leaders, there are many things about leaders that we might talk about. On your outline there under A, you'll notice leaders can be chosen by man or chosen by God. If we think about this for a minute, looking in the Old Testament, Samuel. Was he chosen by man or chosen by God? God. How do you know that? God called him when he was just a boy, remember? Okay, that's good. What about Samuel's sons? Anybody remember Samuel's sons? Were they chosen by God or were they chosen by men to be leaders? They were chosen by men, that's right. They were chosen as Samuel's successors, and they didn't do such a good job. If you look at 1 Samuel 8, verse 1, you'll see that the people weren't happy with them. How about Saul? In the Old Testament, was he chosen by men or chosen by God?
Men wanted him, but God managed to pick him.
Okay.
Men wanted him.
No, come on. What really happened? God chose him. That's right. He was chosen by God. You can't beg on that. In spite of the fact that he didn't have a wonderful career to the end, he was chosen by God. Okay? So that means that God can choose leaders who, over the long haul of their career, may fail him. Okay? And that's an important lesson to learn. What about David? He also was chosen by God. What about Joab?
David's general?
Yeah.
Chosen by men.
Okay, he was chosen by men. David chose him, in fact, and if you remember the story, David promised the generalship of his army to the man who would be the first into Jerusalem. So Joab did it. He was the first into Jerusalem. He led the troops in a victory in Jerusalem. Okay, as we look at this then, what we can see is that leaders can indeed be chosen by men or chosen by God, and they can be effective in that process. We could look at others. For example, Paul chose Timothy to go with him. It doesn't tell us that the Lord told him to choose Timothy. We don't see that as we see with Samuel being told specifically, you anoint Saul, you anoint David. We don't know for the fact what happened with Paul's relationship to Timothy, but we can choose leaders. That's part of the responsibility that the Lord gives us. Okay, the second thing that we can see about leaders is that they can be impressive or unimpressive. I'm not going to write this up, but if you take a look at Saul, was he impressive or unimpressive? Yeah, he was very impressive. In fact, what does the Scripture say about him?
He stood head and shoulders.
Head and shoulders above the other people. Okay, that's important to recognize then. He was a very impressive man. At the time that David was chosen, was he impressive? No, he wasn't. In fact, if you remember the story, Samuel was much more impressed with David's older brother. He said, surely this must be the man. And then, if you remember the story, God told him, no, I'm looking on the heart. So, when a person is chosen, they may or may not be humanly impressive. We really don't know that that is the case. Sometimes they can be, but a person can be a very significant leader and be like the Apostle Paul. Now, does the Apostle Paul say he was humanly impressive? In fact, he says he wasn't. That was one of his problems with the church at Corinth. He wasn't so impressive. The other guys were much more impressive than he was. And so he had to argue with them about his right to be their leader. Okay, what about the proper, improper lineage? That's family, for those of you that wouldn't connect with that. Is that important? Well, sometimes it is. We'll get into that case study next in 2 weeks when we take a look at some of the things that are happening in the Old Testament. Lineage can be a very important issue in some occasions, and some occasions it may not be so important. For the people in, let's take the Apostle Paul. What did he say about his lineage? Yeah, he was a Jew. What does he say about himself as a Jew? A Hebrew of the Hebrews, right? I mean, he was proud of his lineage. He said, if anybody can boast about being a Jew, I can. And what about his education? Very good. He can boast about his education. Okay, what about Peter? Peter have much to boast about in terms of his lineage? No. Does he have much to boast about in terms of education? No. Okay, here are two men. God chose both of them. And they were very significant leaders. In fact, God actually chose Peter to be the one who led in the founding of his church in Jerusalem. And Peter was the key leader in Jerusalem for the first decade of the church. It was only at the point when James was murdered and Peter was next to be killed that Peter stepped out of his leadership role. You'll find that in Acts chapter 11. So what you see then is that you can have people who are impressive in terms of their credentials. You can have them unimpressive. You can have them impressive in terms of their education, their lineage. But these things may or may not be crucial in terms of their leadership. The last thing that we can look at there is whether they have experience or not. Sometimes you hear people say it's so important that leaders have experience. When I was being considered for the job of provost in the university, one of the complaints that people have made about my candidacy was that I was not experienced as an administrator. Looking back at my record, I hadn't served as a dean. I hadn't even served as a department chair. So how is it that somebody without any experience could possibly take that position? It's a very legitimate question and a very important one. Now, leaders can be people with experience or without it. Take, for example, Saul. Did Saul have much experience? No. If you go back and look, he had none. He was not a leader. In fact, he was so afraid of taking the job that he hid in the baggage when it came time for him to be anointed. But he gained experience pretty rapidly. If you look at what happened to David, David had quite a different experience. David was anointed as a young man. But when did he actually become the king? A long time later. A long time. How old was he? 30. That's right. And before he became king of all of Israel? 7 more years. Okay. So if you think about this, David was very experienced in leadership. You know where he got his training? Saul's house. You know who his mentor was? Jonathan. We'll talk about that as we go further on in the course. But David was actually taught how to fight. When he went to face Goliath, he didn't know how. He didn't know how to wear armor, but if you read the text later on, he learned how. Well, Jonathan's the one who taught him. Jonathan was an expert in fighting. He'd had a lot of experience before he met David. And so in this process, you see you have people who are experienced or people who are not experienced being called into positions of leadership. It really doesn't matter. What makes the difference is this the right person at the right time with the right skills and with the right experience for the job God has for them. Okay, let's go on. What is the difference between leaders and leadership? As we think about leadership, we're asking the question, how do leaders lead? What is the process by which leaders, in fact, accomplish their task? As we look at this process, there are 5 different things that we've noted here on this page. Authority is one aspect of how a leader leads. If you don't have authority, and if you don't know how to exercise authority, you're not probably going to be very effective as a leader. Now, authority can come as spiritual authority, or it can come as temporal authority. Everyone has the possibility of having both. If it's spiritual authority, and we can think, for example, of Samuel. Samuel clearly had spiritual authority, a very close relationship with God. Then Samuel did what he did on the basis of his power from God. Everywhere he went, people recognized him as a spiritual man who had great power and authority from God. If you look at Joab, Joab was not a spiritual man at all. Joab was a military man. He had temporal authority. He was in charge of the army in Israel. And his power base was primarily drawn from the army that he controlled, that he was the head of. Now, in thinking about this, Joab's authority came on the basis of his role as general and the structure of that role in society, general over the army in relationship to the king. So Joab had very much power. It was temporal power. It was based upon social structure and his role within that structure. Authority comes in both ways. And authority always has both of those dimensions if we're talking about spiritual leadership and we're talking about men and women who are working in the kingdom of God. The second issue we have is the issue of legitimacy. Again, you can have spiritual and temporal legitimacy. What does legitimacy mean? It means that it's right. It means that it's something that people recognize as being proper. Now, legitimacy can be spiritual in the sense that it is based upon the canons of faith, upon the understandings people have of the Scripture. It can be based upon the position that one has in ministry, in relationship to the body of Christ, or in relationship to God's people, as in the case of Samuel and the temple. Or it can be based upon tradition and standards of society that regulate how people behave, as we have in the relationship of Joab. Joab gained his authority because he was an effective warrior, and it was traditional that if you were an effective warrior, you'd be recognized as a leader among the people of Israel and among their neighbors. So the standards of legality have to do with spiritual criteria or with social criteria. And each of them can be appropriate in terms of the kind of work that one does as a leader in a particular social situation. Let's go on to the issue of support. Support is absolutely essential if you're going to be a leader. People have to follow you. Otherwise, you're not a leader. A leader with no followers is not a leader. People there have to support what you do. They have to feel that this is important to them enough so that they will follow along, that they will come with you and work with you. Support comes in a number of different ways. Of course, we want to have the support of God. If we're going to be Christian leaders, that's the absolutely essential, to be sure that we're on God's side, that God is really doing His work through us and we're not doing our own thing. So in fact, support in a spiritual basis comes through following, not through leading. In other words, if we're going to be effective leaders for the kingdom of God, we must first of all be effective followers of the King of Kings. And until that happens, we're not going to have the kind of support, spiritual support that we need. Support spiritually is dependent upon God's grace and mercy to us. God provides all of our needs, but He does it according to His plan and according to His purpose. Sometimes you can have God's support and not have the people's support. Witness Moses. How often Moses had God's support and didn't have the people's support. Okay? So getting the support from people is another question. It's another agenda. It has to do with social relationships. It has to do with the temporal dimensions, with life, with the complex factors of the social world in which we live. It can have to do with your personality. People may not like you just because of how God made you. Or they may like you because of how God made you, not because of what you do. Okay? It may be because of the goals that you have. It may be because you reward them for the things that they do. Support may be all of these complex factors that are just a part of living in society. Friendship, kinship, any of these things can be factors which bring about support. I'm sure that if my wife were here tonight, she would like what I have to say just because she's my wife. You know, she supports me. We have a good relationship. And very seldom does she tell me that I did a lousy job. Even if I did, she probably wouldn't say it in those terms because she is a loyal supporter just because of our very close relationship. Now, my son is also a good supporter of mine, but he's a little bit more competitive, and he can tell me if I didn't do such a good job, and probably do it a little bit more readily than my wife would. Probably because I've told him on plenty of occasions that he didn't do a good job. And so it's a kind of dynamic of interpersonal relationship. But again, if anybody attacked me, my son would probably be one of the first to come around and support because of that close relationship. So kinship is a basis for support. Friendship is a basis of support. And all of these other kinds of social things are part of how we work. The last, not the last thing, next to the last thing, decision making. Decision-making is a part of leadership, a very crucial part of leadership. If a leader doesn't make decisions, people get very unhappy with the leader. I remember Dani Indians down in the jungle in Brazil complaining about one of their chiefs. They said, that guy doesn't do anything. He never calls us to have feast. He's worthless. We don't need that kind of a leader. We need somebody who can get us going and make us have feast. Well, he really didn't have any power to make them have feast, but he also didn't have the initiative to mobilize them to do it. He didn't make the decision and say, let's have a feast today. He was too busy with his own personal things. People like leaders who make decisions, decisions that are in their benefit, decisions that move things along, that keep things going. And when people sense that things are not going anywhere, they begin to ask questions about their leaders. They begin to say, well, is this person a leader? Is there anything happening here? And why do we have this guy as a leader or this woman as a leader if there's nothing happening in a significant way? So decision making is a crucial part of leadership. Now, people make decisions on spiritual and on temporal bases. Once again, you have to recognize that both of these are part of the dimension of the decision process. Prayer, reading the Word of God, seeking out counselors, is the way that we commonly seek spiritual guidance as we look at making decisions. In our social realm, we also look at procedures. You can make the right decision and use the wrong procedure and everybody will be unhappy. Everybody will be unhappy because the procedure is so important to people in terms of what they do. If the pastor in your church decided without consulting anybody to do something that was really great, people would still complain about it because they weren't consulted with. I mean, I can't think of something that, let's say the pastor went out and got $100,000 for the church, through certain contacts and initiatives he had. Nobody would complain about having this particular source of funds, especially if they didn't have to pay it back, but they would probably complain that he didn't consult with them before he went and did it, and somehow this happened without going through proper channels. Channels are so important to decision making. People have values that they feel should be adhered to when we make decisions. People expect certain kinds of rewards in the decision process, and if those rewards don't happen, they feel that somehow the decision didn't benefit them or wasn't appropriate because of that. So decision making is also complex. It has all kinds of factors involved in it that we must consider as we look at this issue of leadership. Finally, you have the exercise of power. The exercise of power is something that is so crucial to what happens in the process of leadership. Every leader has power. If you look at Samuel, Samuel was a very powerful man. He was powerful as a judge. People came to him with their problems. He would decide what the solution was, and people respected him and abided by his decisions. He was powerful as a spiritual leader. When Saul was out looking for his donkeys, he and his friends said, hey, maybe we need to go and find the seer and ask the seer if he can help us. Saul had the insight, spiritual insight, that could help people with their problems. Samuel did. And so, as you think about Samuel, he was a man who had the power of God. He also had social power as the leader of all of Israel. Now, when his sons became leaders, they abused that power. They exercised the same power that their father had as a judge, but the Scriptures tell us that they used it for their selfish ends and purposes. So when we see leadership, we have to understand that leadership involves the exercise of power. And the exercise of power can be used for God's glory and for the good of the people, or it can be used for selfish ends, and it can be used to further an objective which really isn't the objective for the community, but an objective for yourself or from some special interest group. There are all kinds of power. Obviously, the spiritual power that we have is the gift of the Holy Spirit. We need to understand that as a very crucial dimension to what we do and how we do our work. At the same time, we need to understand that there is also very much temporal power that we have access to. And we're going to spend a significant time in this course looking at temporal power. Because if you don't know how to use temporal power, no matter how spiritual you are, you will fail as a leader. Because every spiritual leader must be able to understand and know how to use appropriately temporal power. There is coercive power. You can force people to do things they don't want to do. There is consensual power, power that comes through discussion and dialogue and people agreeing all together. There is institutional power. The institution has a power structure of its own, and people in the institution, in positions in it, have power. When a secretary says to you, I'm sorry, I can't do that, that is a power decision. She's telling you, or he's telling you, that I can't do this because of the institutional power. And whether, they may not want to do it, and that's why they tell you that. They may tell you, I can't do this because they're using the institutional structure to enable them to do that. There's also persuasive power. That's another part of the agenda that we can have as we work with people, to persuade them, and through persuasion, to get them to follow. Well, as you look at these things, you can see that leaders are people, who have all kinds of varying experiences, but leadership focuses on authority, legitimacy, support, decision-making, and the exercise of power. All of these are things that have to do with relationships, the structuring of those relationships, and how persons interact with other people. To understand leadership, then, we've got to study this complex set of interrelated variables that make up the picture of a leader in action. In this course, we're going to be studying alternatives for temporal leadership. In fact, last week, in our discussion of the 4 different social environments and the authority structures in community, we saw that communities can structure authority in 4 very different kinds of ways. That communities can set up procedures for settling disputes in 4 very significantly different ways. The chapter we didn't discuss talked about the web, the hive, the chain, and the net as 4 different ways of structuring the dispute process. And so the processes you see can vary significantly. The structures of authority can vary. The procedures for decision making can vary. And as we look at the kinds of things we find in society, it's important for us to be able to understand that tremendous variability and know how leadership must work within the medium of the society that we're working in, within the rules that are part of that social setting, and also within the framework of what we understand as the kingdom of God. We must know that God is calling us out of the particular prison of disobedience in which we find ourselves. And as He calls us out, He wants us to be transformed in the image of Christ. He wants our leadership relationships to be transformed in the image of Christ. And for that to happen, we have to know what prison we're in. We have to understand what constraints they're in. We have to help those people and ourselves to be able to move forward in a process that would bring glory to God. Now, what I can tell you is that God will probably move them forward in their social setting instead of mine, the outsiders. Because as I come in from the outside, I don't want them to become like me. And God doesn't want them to become like me either. He wants them to become like Him. And so the process then is for people to be transformed within their own context to become all that Christ wants them to be. I think I'll conclude this part of the lecture by just saying that each of us, if we're going to be effective leaders, must know how to exercise spiritual and temporal power. If we fail in one, we will fail as leaders. We need to be able to be effective in both. And if we can't be effective in both, then God really won't be able to use us. Because the truth of it is that we live and work in society. We cannot be hermits. We have to be engaged. And being engaged, we're engaged with people in their relationships. And they will demand from us that we know how to lead them within their own circumstances and according to their own limitations and the constraints which are part of who they are and how they live. To help us in that, our reading for tonight gives us some ways of approaching the study of the temporal dimensions of leadership. As you think about this book, Bowman and Deal, it's an outstanding book for opening up to us the kind of frames, the kind of windows that we can look through to begin to understand something about leadership in the social settings in which we work. What I'd like to do in the remaining half hour of this particular session is to get you to help me review the key issues that are here in Bowman and Deal. And then after we've done that, we'll take a break and we'll come back and discuss 2 specific chapters in our second session. First of all, Bowman and Deal define 4 approaches. You remember what they are? You look on your outline on page 25. They're written down there, so I don't need to repeat them to you. What I'd like to do is to get you involved now, get you awake for the next couple of minutes, and ask you to define each of the 4 approaches. Let's begin with the structural approach. What is the structural approach? Just briefly, summarize what you see as the key elements of this particular approach. Okay. Organizational goals, rules, Technology. Anything else? Roles, okay. That's good. What's the difference between rules and roles?
Roles is the part you play or you're assigned to play. Rules are how you play that role.
Okay, excellent. The role is the part you play, and rules are the assignments that you have as you play that role. That's excellent, okay? What else do you see in the structural approach? What do they say about the structural approach in terms of its systemic characteristic?
It doesn't leave any room for personality.
Okay, it doesn't leave room for personality. Okay,
They want to eliminate human discretion and personality differences
okay, in favor of what?
through organization structure.
Okay, organization and structure. Okay, Sue?
Yeah, they're saying even the right people will have difficulties in the wrong structure. So if you get the right structure, then things will work out.
Okay, it has to be the right structure. It has to be what they call a rational system. Okay, the whole emphasis on rationality. It's a rational system. Okay, and being rational, you know, it's well organized. It's structured in such a way that it fulfills the purpose, right? The purpose of the environment that you want to look at. Okay, that's good. Let's go on and take a look at the second system. The second type of frame that they define is the human resource frame. Okay? As you look at the human resource frame, what are the key characteristics of the human resource frame? Okay, people. All right. What about people? Okay, their skills, needs, values, okay, relationships. All right, as you think about this, what is the key question that the human resource people ask? Okay, is this the right person for the right job? It's really the question of fit. Okay? Does this person fit? Are they in the right place? Do their needs, their skills, their values really fit with the role that they've been given? Are they just in the right place? Now, it's interesting as you think about this, the organization has goals. The organization has objectives that it's working toward. And the question of fit is one of trying to determine whether the job that you or I have been given really is a fit for the goals of the organization that we're working in. If you've ever applied for a job, that's one of the things that people will be asking. They'll be trying to figure out, are you the right fit for that particular job? Are you the person with the skills, the needs, the values, and relationships that belong in that particular context? It's interesting, I've just been going through a long process of searching for a new dean for Talbot School of Theology. And my responsibility is to make that appointment. And as I've been working with the faculty groups in Talbot, the whole faculty, I interviewed each of them in small groups of 3. And then as I worked with the Academic Policies Committee, which is the committee I used as the primary advisory committee to me, over and over again they asked this question of fit. Okay? Is the candidate that we're interviewing one that really fits with the job? Is this one that will fit the need that we have for the organization? But their particular concern was more, did that person fit in terms of these kinds of objectives? The role that we had defined, the particular goals of the organization, the purpose that the organization had, and would that person fit there? We weren't really so much concerned, although we were concerned, about some of these questions. Did this person's unique particular gifts and skills fit with the particular job that we had and the things that we wanted to accomplish? So human resources is a very important part of understanding how to select leaders and whether they should be in that position or not. Amy? You going to ask a question? Or?
Well, we're like,
Okay. All right, I'll come back. Let's go on to the political question. If we look at the political frame, what do we see as the key characteristics of the political frame? I'm sorry, Dixon, I didn't hear. Okay, the test of results. All right. What did you say?
scarcity.
Scarcity.
Of resources.
Okay.
How to manage and how to distribute. And
Okay, one of the key things about the political is resources. And you've picked up the right word, scarcity. And distribution. Okay? So as we look at the political frame, it has to do with resources. Usually they're scarce. I've never been in an organization where they were abundant. And so there's always the question of how they shall be distributed. Who gets what and how will that work out? I walked into the office this morning. I no sooner got through the door than I heard this yell, "Sherwood!" And so I turned and I was summoned over by my associate and one of his colleagues to resolve the problem of the office space. We have this location that is currently being discussed as to who should get this particular space and where we should move this one person to so we can use this space for another purpose. And so my first 10 minutes this morning were spent on the issue of scarce resource, space, and how it should be distributed. And I couldn't even get to my office until I solved that particular problem. Now, it's interesting. I've learned in the job that I'm in that those issues can become more important than anything else. And so after I got to my office and put my things down, I walked over to another office, to another dean, and I sat down and I talked to that dean about his particular concerns about space and his needs for space. And would this decision impact his particular interests and concerns? And as we discussed that, they said, "Oh, no, that would be okay. We have these other ideas. We'd like to do this, that, and the other thing." And so I saved myself a lot of later trouble by going immediately and talking to other possibly interested people about this issue of space and its distribution. When I have failed to do that before, I have paid dearly because of the criticism and because of the frustration that's created by not consulting with people and getting their input on these issues. I can tell you truly that probably there are no greater fights that go on at Biola than there are fights about space and the scarcity of space and where people are going to go and what they're going to have. Now, we can laugh at that, and we do laugh about it, but it's a reality. It's a very real part of our work. And another thing that happens as we deal with issues of resources is that when they are scarce, people feel anxious about them. And they then begin to try to do what they can to accomplish their interest in that process. If you think about this, what is another word that Bowman and Deal use in relationship to this political frame?
Conflict.
Conflict, right. Conflict is an important part of the political frame. What's another word?
Power.
Okay, power, right. Because where there's conflict, there's also struggle for power. All right, if we're going to be effective in the political frame, what must we be capable of doing?
Resolve conflict.
Resolving conflict, that's right. And also, what about this? We have to be able to manage power, that's right. We have to be able to manage power. It's what I was talking about when we were discussing the whole issue of exercising power in the opening lecture. Okay, the political frame then is one that focuses on resources, power, and conflict. And we can sum it up in that framework. I think that's a key dimension of that particular perspective. Okay, the last perspective that Bowman and Deal take is the symbolic perspective. as we look at the symbolic perspective, what is the key agenda in focus here?
Shared values.
Okay, values, all right. They express it in a little different term. Not value is important, but you can have value in all of them. This one really focuses on something bigger than values.
Culture?
Culture? Yeah, culture is true. Ray?
Focuses on meanings of problems or
Okay, that's right. I think this word meaning is very important. Because meaning is much more than value. Meaning has to do with whether this is meaningful for me, whether this is a purpose that's worthy of my time and investment, whether this activity that we're involved in contributes something that is fulfilling in a much bigger sense of the term than just my pay. Most everybody works for money. But if they don't have meaning in their job, they can grumble and complain and find it completely without redeeming value. They said, the only reason I do this job is for money. You know, and I have to have the money, and I hate it, and I wish I didn't have to work there, but I do it because I have to have the money. You know, when people have meaning in their work, they get excited about it. It becomes something that's significant to them. It becomes something that they can commit to with a great deal of energy and fervor. Sometimes people ask me how I can keep writing when I'm working full-time in administration. And there's only one way to answer that. Right there. It's meaning. It's something that I have that's important to me. It gives me purpose in life. It's something that I do because it's a passion with me. And because it has meaning, it has something that's very significant to what I do, I stay in it. Some people ask me why I teach when I work full-time in administration. And I can tell you again, it's meaning. It keeps me in touch with why Biola is here, what we're doing here. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I'm so tired I don't want to come to class. But I never feel that way when I'm finished. Never. Because when I'm finished, I realize this is why I'm here. This is the purpose of being in this place. This is the meaning of what we work for. And so a day that's exhausting in the office, followed by a 3-hour class at night, is exhilarating. Because it brings me back into touch with the meaning of why we're here at Biola and what we are here to do. So meaning, you see, is something that's powerful and important to us in organizations. And Bowman and Deal argue that we must understand the central nature of meaning if we're going to understand how organizations work. Whether it's present or whether it isn't will be a key thing in how effective an organization is. Bob?
How does this differ, the meaning there differ than human resources? Because human resources focuses on the worker being happy, meeting their needs, and deriving some implicit motivations from him. If the worker is happy, he feels like he has something to contribute, and he gets meaning there too.
Okay.
I kind of see it tied.
This is organizational meaning.
Okay.
Okay? And my illustrations perhaps refocuses on individual. And so let me come back to the organizational meaning. The organizational meaning is a meaning that not only the organization has, but somehow is captured and shared by the people who work in it. For example, I say the reason I teach and the reason that I write is because of meaning. Now that's my personal motivation, and that keeps me in touch with the meaning. But the reason that I came to Biola was because Biola stands for something that has much more significant meaning than where I worked before. I taught for 15 years in the State University of New York. When I came here to Biola in 1983, my wife and I took a $35,000 pay cut to come. So why did we come? It was meaning. It was because here you were doing something that was much more important in my eyes than what I was doing in the State University of New York. Because here we were equipping men and women to impact the world for Jesus Christ. We were investing in lives that would go out and invest themselves in other people's lives. When I was teaching in the State University of New York, I had students there who were not believers. I had an opportunity to talk to some of them about their faith. And that was important, and that was a rich and rewarding experience. But generally, I was not allowed to mention my faith in the classroom. I was not allowed to integrate in my discipline if I'd published the kind of things that I've published here, they would have never promoted me for them. They would have not felt that that was significant. In fact, I've sent some of the things that I've published since I came here back to my colleagues, and they are absolutely silent about them. They say nothing. Because from their point of view, it's a meaning that is meaningless to them. It has no power in their lives. It has no significance in terms of what they want to do. So this organization to me was an organization that I wanted to belong to because it was committed to a ministry and a mission that was powerful in my eyes and in my life. That's what they mean by meaning in that sense. The organization has a meaning and is shared by those who participate in it. Now, I'm sure there's some people here at Biola that haven't caught into that meaning. Because the ability of leaders to communicate the meaning is part of the whole process of leadership. If I, as the academic vice president, am ineffective in communicating that meaning to my colleagues, and somehow they lose sight of why we're here, they can become discouraged, they can become frustrated, they can say, what's the purpose of being a Biola? I got to work for low pay, I don't get anything out of it. It doesn't seem to have anything beyond the measure of where we are now. What's the purpose in all this? There is a leadership failure. In other words, when I cannot communicate to people the excitement of the meaning and help them to get on with this purpose, then somehow I haven't managed correctly. That's what Bowman and Deal are saying. They're saying that in organizations, the ability to communicate and produce shared commitment to meaning is crucial to organizational success. They talk about cohesion. Okay, cohesion comes about when you have shared meaning. It's not just common belief, it's common belief that binds people together for a purpose. Now, the bigger the institution, the tougher it is to do this. The smaller the institution, the more intimate the community, the more likely it is that this kind of cohesive shared vision can predominate. But in getting this to happen, it is a challenge to be able to pull an institution along and to have all of its members buy into the central purpose and significance of the vision. Okay, these are 4 different ways of looking at leadership. As they say in the text, they're windows into the leadership process. They help us to begin to understand what's going on as we look at the world of leadership. You have an assignment during this course to pick an organization and to go and study it, if they will allow you to do it, and to try to learn as much as you can about their leadership process. Bowman and Deal give you then 4 different windows to look through. 4 different ways of examining the dynamics of leadership in that organization. And one of the things that you'll want to do is you'll want to reflect on the things that we find in depth in each of these chapters. We'll go to these chapters and we'll look at them carefully. And we'll try to begin to glean out of them some of the key things that you will need as concepts to be able to explore these agendas as you go about your research project. Tonight we'll look at the 2 chapters on the structural approach and then the 2 chapters on the human resource approach in some depth in our next session. But before we get into that, I want to paint the bigger picture. You can use this in a very effective way for studying leadership cross-culturally. You may be interested to know where I discovered this book. I discovered it in a doctoral dissertation written by a man by the name of David Bennett, who was a pastor, a very successful pastor here in the United States. And they became interested in leadership. He went to Fuller, studied with Paul Hebert at Fuller, discovered this book as part of his research, and then went to India and used the 4 frames to study leadership in churches in South India. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful dissertation, I should say. He's also publishing a book out of it on spiritual leadership in the New Testament. And there are many, many good insights in David Bennett's work. But the thing that fascinated me most as I served on his dissertation committee was how he took these 4 approaches and he used them to gain insights into what was going on in these churches in India. So these are tools that can be used in any social context. They offer for you opportunities to ask questions and to dig into the social context and also into the way that people relate spiritually to one another within the setting of the church as they attempt to have a dynamic, growing, vital organization in ministry for the Lord Jesus Christ. The last question we have down there is, how should a student of leadership apply these approaches to the study of leadership cross-culturally? I've answered that question for you. I should have given you the chance to struggle with it, but I've really posed that question and given you some ways to think about it. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask as we draw this session to a close?
Yeah,
Stephen.
I know you explained the meaning of meaning here in organizational structure also, but then in explaining this to someone who has little or no idea about the topic or the vocabulary, would you say is meaning also has the same meaning as say the people's anticipated achievement, what we expect to achieve?
Okay, I would say for those of us who are involved as Christians in Christian ministry, meaning for us, or the symbolic approach, helps us to see the central importance of our faith, of our commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ, and of our mission in the Lord always before us. Having that centrally in focus so that we never lose touch with why it is that we're committed to work together as a people, why it is that we're committed to the sacrifices that we must make to be in an organization, why it is that we have before us an agenda that may be evangelism, it may be discipling, it may be ministry to the sick, or whatever it might be, to keep always in focus the spiritual purpose that lies behind that. The nature of our relationship with Christ. To me, Bowman and Deal are telling us that if we're going to be as effective as Christians, they don't say this, but when they say the symbolic approach is so important to the success of organizations, what they're saying is that if you don't know the spiritual purpose, and if you don't have always before you the God-given plan that is part of what we want to do, and you don't keep that before your people and keep it burning in their hearts, that they're going to focus on other issues. They're going to divide about property. They're going to get frustrated about not getting their share of the pie. They're going to be disgusted with you because you didn't handle the meeting properly and in process. It's interesting, as you look at the symbolic approach, they say that organizations that have very high, powerful commitment to symbols can have a lot of mess and some of the other stuff there, and people let it go by because they're so swept up in the meaning. They're so swept up in the purpose of what's going on there. So to me, what this does is it helps us to keep in focus our spiritual purpose. And if you can communicate that to your brothers and sisters, that we never want to lose sight of why we're here, that we're serving the Lord Jesus Christ, that this is His task, that He's called us to serve Him and to do as He wants us to do. And that's really the focal agenda. Now, the other agendas focus on whether we have the right person doing the right job, human resource approach, and that sometimes can really hinder ministry. You put somebody in a job they're just not equipped to do, okay? Or whether you've organized them in a way that really fits and is rational to accomplish the job. You might be that you don't have an organization, and there's no clear-cut pattern for people to do things, and so they're always getting in each other's way and don't know what they're doing, and so they're frustrated because it's disorganized. That could be a problem. Or it could be that you haven't resolved the issue of power and resources and how that needs to be done. Those are other dimensions. And each one of those are important frames to look at. Now, have I answered your question? Okay. Yes, great.
The issue of powerful public and political action be intertwined strongly with structural frame. You can have a strong structure and still struggle with unlimited resources and allocating power, even if, well...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You cannot, these are conceptually separate, but in the real life situation, they're always all present, or lacking to the deficit of the organization. In other words, when you look at real life, you're going to see all of these intertwine. The key thing to remember is that Bowman and Deal are talking about windows, okay, a set of eyeglasses that you look through. And so when you're looking at an organization, what questions are you asking? Usually you'll ask only a certain kind of questions. And the value of this book is it helps us to ask all 4 kinds of questions. It says you can't really know what's going on in an organization unless you address all 4 of these agendas. The reason for that is, as you've discovered, they're all there. The process is continuing to go on there, and they're all mixed together in the reality of people's behavior. Okay? Any other question? Okay, if not, we'll take a break. Okay, we're working on lecture discussion 6, page 26 in your syllabus, Structural and Human Resource Approaches to Leadership. In this section of our class today, we're going to be taking Bowman and Deal. And in the syllabus, you'll see I have a series of questions. And so what I'd like to do is spend this time discussing these issues with you and working together to try to help us to understand the content in this book and get a deeper appreciation for 2 of the 4 approaches that we have tonight. The first approach that we're going to examine is the structural approach. If you want to open your books to those chapters, the structural approach begins on page around 32 and actually 27 and goes on through 57. So that's the section that we'll be looking at in the next hour. The first question I'd like to explore with you is the question of assumptions. What are the key assumptions of the structural approach? Or what is the key assumption, I should say? Bob?
If there's a problem in an organization, it can be solved by reorganizing or changing the structure.
Okay, excellent. The first assumption is that if there is a problem, the solution lies in the structure. Okay? What else do they assume? What other assumptions?
Organizations exist just to accomplish the established goals.
Okay, the organization exists to accomplish established goals. So that's important. For goals. Okay? What else is part of the assumption?
That a structure can be systematically designed and implemented.
Okay, a structure, it's systematic. Can be systematically designed and implemented. And being systematic, it's also, what's the word people use having to do with the mind? Rational. That's right, it's a rational system. Okay. All right, as we think about the assumptions, how did those assumptions spill over into action? If an organization has these assumptions, then how do they act? Bob?
Well, they act accordingly. Again, if there's a problem in the organization, they're going to reorganize. And it's, well, maybe we need to change the whole structure around. They always look, it must be a structural problem. They won't look for, it could be a human resource problem, but always going back and changing the structure.
Okay. It inevitably leads to this idea of if there is a problem, somehow the organization must be where it lies. I remember when I first became provost at Biola, there was quite a bit of discussion and frustration about the issue of shared governance. And in that discussion, it always came back to the fact that we didn't have the right structure. We really needed to reorganize, and if we reorganized, what we really needed, many said, was a faculty senate. If we had a faculty senate, that would take care of the problem. Well, unfortunately, I'd just come from the State University of New York where we had a faculty senate. And I had served on it one term and got so frustrated with the waste of time that it was for me and the tremendous energy that went into it with seemingly little outcome, that I thought to myself, that structure certainly isn't the one that I'm looking forward to having here. But many felt that a structural solution was the right solution. Now, interestingly enough, I kind of got in the same rut as well. I thought, yeah, we need to change the structure, but not to that one. Let's try some other structures. And so the first faculty workshop we had at the end of my first year, I offered 3 alternative structures for improving our shared governance. We didn't use any of those, and we didn't make any major structural changes. And interestingly enough, over the past 4 years, there are still people who have some concern about governance, but probably many of those concerns have been resolved by more effective utilization of people in many of the different areas where we're working. And we didn't make substantive structural changes. So yet the thing that amused me about this, when I read Bowman and Deal, I realized that the faculty had said it was a structural problem and needed structural change. I said it was a structural problem, needed structural change. And some of the others in the administration felt that, yeah, we needed to do something structurally. In fact, one of my colleagues did a survey of structures of faculty governance at 5 different other Christian organizations because we were looking at structure as the solution. So there is that tendency to focus on structure as somehow the answer to any problems you have in an organization. Do you want to say more on that, Bob?
Well, it's also like if you're not, for a company that's producing, say, widgets, it's not enough, then you need more control. So it again becomes more rigid and controlling the worker through rules rather than maybe seeing if the worker's happy.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Great.
the emphasis is creating a norm within the organization, so it creates more of a, say, a policy manual or more detailed job description, so you have a norm behavior.
Okay.
It doesn't allow more of a variety, but it has more of a structure within that organization.
Okay. The goal is a norm, to have things happening in a way that are predictable and everybody knows what's going to happen, and then we do fine in that regard. Okay. As we think about then the assumptions, we've looked at them. You've got the solution lies in the structure. It exists for goals. It's systematic. There are a number of other things that we could talk about. Specialization is a key part of a structural approach. You know, and specialization usually is tied to performance. If you remember the discussion of the assembly line in Bowman and Deal, and how, you know, the great invention was to specialize, 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 and then keep people doing the same thing over and over again so that they got better and better at it. That's part of the nature of a structural approach, and it's part of the nature of an organization that bases itself on a structural philosophy. So that's one of the things that you need to have clear. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What are some of the key structural variations in complex organizations? As you look at complex organizations, how do they vary? What are some of the distinctions that you find within them?
Environmental change.
Environmental change?
Technological change. Technology change.
Okay. How does that produce a structural variation? In other words, if you're looking at the kind of structures that you can have, that's really the question. Environmental change would be something that happens to a company. Then if they would change structurally, what would they be doing? Do you have different levels of organization and institution?
Yeah, each level.
Okay, you can have levels of complexity, can you not? You know, for example, in a factory, what are the 2 most common levels in any factory?
Labor and management.
Labor and management, that's right. Okay. Now, what are some of the sub-levels that you would have?
You would have department heads, you would have production workers, you would have supervisors over them, you'd have the president, you'd have vice presidents of
Okay.
various departments within the white collar.
Okay, so in terms of looking at the variation then in structure, you can have levels of organization, if you will, levels of complexity. There are, in any kind of an organization, you can have the complexity vary greatly. You can have changes at the institutional level. You can have changes at a managerial level, what you've defined as different managerial hierarchies here. Or you can have technical variations in terms of the structure. For example, you can have the paint section of the auto manufacturing company and then the main body assembly area, and you can also have the engine assembly area or something like that where you have technical variations. So that as you look at structural variations in manufacturing, the levels can relate to managerial divisions or to institutional divisions or to the technical kind of divisions that people have. Let's turn that over to a place like Biola. How do we have structural variations here? How does it work? What are the technical divisions that we have?
Faculty and staff.
Okay, those would be managerial.
Academic versus residence life versus like chaplaincy and spiritual life.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Academic and residence life are two very good ones, or we call them, the words that we use for them are the student affairs area and the instructional area. Well, the student affairs area is co-curricular, whereas the instructional area is curricular. So there's technical differences there in what people do. In looking at that kind of division, that is kind of a major divide in the academic area. Then there are other divides, such as the finance area. Okay? The finance area is not curricular at all. It's not even co-curricular. It's basically finance. So those would be technical divides. Now, looking at those, what are some of the divisions you'd find within the academic area, technically?
The theology department, psychology, would that be?
Yeah, exactly. The psychology department, the sociology department, the history department, the intercultural studies, those are, again, technical divisions, technical structural variations within them. And so I remember making this comment to Gary McIntosh after he came and started working in Talbot. I said, Gary, I was still in the faculty, how come you are teaching church growth over there and David Leo's teaching church growth and intercultural studies? I mean, can't we get together and utilize our resources so we get one church growth course? Well, no, we're really different because Gary's specialization is American church growth. And David Leo's specialization was church growth in Taiwan and in third world countries. And so they're dealing with different technical areas, and it's not the same church growth course. So I got an education in church growth at that process. But there was definitely a technical specialization there. And it's a divide, if you will, on the basis of the technology and the basis of the focus of the particular interest. Now, we have the technical divide. We have a managerial divide as well. The managerial divide has to do with faculty and staff. Every technical area has its faculty and staff. Every technical area has its deans and its support personnel, maybe department chairs. So you have a managerial divide within each technical area. You also have institutional divide at Biola. What are the 4 institutions of Biola? Schools, that's right. The School of Theology, the School of Arts and Sciences, the School of Intercultural Studies. Each hires their own faculty. Each has a separate budget. Each has a different form of governance in terms of how it operates within its own school. The Rosemead School of Psychology has its own accrediting agency. Talbot has its own accrediting agency. Intercultural Studies and the Arts and Sciences are only accredited under WASC, but music and nursing have separate accrediting agencies. So there's a technical divide, there's an institutional divide. Those are parts of how we're structured here. So if we talk about structural variations, you see the idea of institutional and managerial and technical divisions or variations within an organization are very common kinds of things. I've used that illustration to help you to see how you put those concepts into practice, how you can take them and go to Far East Broadcasting Company or Wycliffe Bible Translators International or World Vision or to the Trinity Presbyterian Church in Tustin or any organization like this and begin to think about the structure of it in these terms and with these questions. All right. In addition to the levels, you also have roles. Can you illustrate role differentiation for me? That should be very easy. Okay, different responsibilities. Give me a label. Name 2 roles in any organization you can think of.
The dean, no? The dean is
The dean, sure. The dean is a role. Absolutely. Okay. Another one. President. Okay, good. President is a role. Role specialization has to do with defining positions which have particular authority and have particular obligations that go with them. Every organization has that. It's part of the process of how the organization works. All right. There are issues of coordination and control in structure. Some structures are vertical. And some structures are lateral. The issue of coordination in terms of vertical or lateral structure is an interesting one. Would you say that Biola has a vertical structure or a lateral one? Vertical. That's right. It's vertical. Okay. And after having read Transforming Culture, if you blew that one, you're in trouble. You know. It says there the chain of command, right? The vertical structure. It's a very important part of the organization. When we talked about the Yappies in that organization, the Yappies had a vertical structure, but they also had a strong lateral structure, didn't they? Going sideways in their network and the important net of linkages in that organization. Murray.
Formally, we have a vertical structure, but isn't there an informal lateral structure? A real egalitarian perspective that we can eat lunch at the carriage house tomorrow, although you're an exalted professor and I'm a lowly student. And
Okay, that's not part of the structure of the organization. Okay.
but isn't that part of the
It's-
informal culture that does
Yeah.
affect the leadership and the...
That's right. It is. But if you use a lateral method to get something done here, you'll get a lot of criticism for it. You'll be going around people, you'll be going over their head, you won't be working through channels, and that will be something that is negatively valued. In a structure that's organized laterally, Apple computers used to be organized laterally. Okay, I say used to. When they first started Apple, they had kind of an open free-for-all. In fact, my brother-in-law worked for Apple just a couple of years ago, and he told me that he had to get rid of all of his suits. He just put them in the closet because he knew he wasn't going to work for Apple forever. He's a contract, and they only have the contract for so many months. But you know, he wore white socks and blue jeans all the time at Apple. And there was this evidence of a lateral structure still existing in which people didn't have a vertical authority. They could go and talk to anybody in any office. There was kind of a cultivation of this whole idea of every person working at his own giftedness to accomplish as much as he can or she can. But now in this process of trying to transform Apple into a multinational corporation, you have much more vertical structure being introduced. Here at Biola, there is an emphasis on developing faculty-student relationships. It's a very important part of the whole idea of mentoring. And we could say we do have some of that involved in it. But as I look at the structure is so thoroughly vertical in terms of how it's organized that that's one of the reasons why we struggle with lateral relationships and keeping them going. If you look at just the faculty promotion system, you come in and you have steps, a whole series of steps. 4 steps: instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, and steps within them. So that kind of specialization and vertical structuring is just part of how the tradition and the culture has developed over time. That's quite different from the lateral play that you had in Apple as it developed its organization first and began to work in that way. Craig was asking me about a mission team that was working in Mindanao in the Philippines. It had a lateral organization, not a vertical one. There was connectedness in terms of parallel teams working in different places to one another. And regardless of how effective or ineffective it was organized in that lateral framework that dominated how it was structured. So always in any organization, you'll have a tendency to produce a counterpoint. In other words, you'll have some lateral activity here. You'll have some vertical activity in a lateral organization like Apple. But that's because structurals never are as rational as people say they are. That comes down to the irrationality of structure, one of the criticisms of this approach. That because they can't really serve with the logic that they have there, people are not always rational, things don't always go the way you want, or the structure doesn't always serve the goals. It's interesting, the president read my book and he said, Christian college doesn't sound like a very Christian place to work. He wasn't real happy with the vertical structuring of it. And, probably none of us are. But to change it is really very, very difficult because you have to say, for example, the president worked in a mission organization where everybody got paid the same thing. Okay. Try that at Biola and see how that works. Scream bloody murder, Throw away all the years that I put into this place, the benefits that I gained. We've had conflict the last 3 years when we have given fixed dollar raises instead of percent raise. And the people who feel most cheated have been the people that are at the high pay because a percent raise is better. And this is not a criticism of them. I'm just saying it's the nature of how things work in a structural system. Okay. What are the advantages of the structural approach? Okay. It eliminates personal preferences. It's fair, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Regardless of your core or your lineage.
Okay.
Background.
Fair. Okay. Standard. That's one of the key things that is touted, that it establishes a standard process, something that people know what the rules are. Okay, what else?
Along with that, you know what's expected of you.
Okay, you know what's expected. Okay. What are the advantages of making structural changes?
Much faster. This morning they didn't have to get involved. Just the top leaders, they can make a decision very quickly.
Okay, if you reorganize, what could be the benefit of that reorganization? Not necessarily the top, but why would you reorganize? Why do people reorganize? Sue?
Quick changes. Quick improvement.
Okay, you hope that it will bring improvement. You hope that it will address an issue or a problem. It will solve something that's there. Now, reorganization sometimes can do wonders, can it? In other words, if in fact the structure is awry, and if it is not enabling people to work together in a coordinated fashion, if you reorganize, you may in fact be able to come up with an increasingly effective process and organization. Sometimes reorganization can do the job. What do you expect when you reorganize in terms of working relationships? Why do people do it?
The reason?
Yeah.
Environmental change.
Okay, they want to adapt to an environmental change, and when they adapt to that, what do they expect will happen with the workers?
Redefining roles, redefining responsibilities, eliminate overlapping roles, everybody kind of knows what's expected again.
Yeah, in terms of redefining roles, changing responsibilities, trying to get people into the place where they can be most effective, the hope of reorganization is smoother function. If it's an organizational problem, then reorganization should remove the problem and things should work smoothly again. It's a little bit like saying you've got a bent valve on your car engine, and if you put in a new valve, it'll work smoothly and it'll run better again. So the idea of reorganization is that if you adjust the organization to get the parts fitting together more smoothly, then it will run in a smooth way. Now, the way that we do this is we tinker with our centralization. Is it centralized enough, or is it too centralized? If it's too centralized, then we decentralize. If it's not centralized enough, we kind of put more power in the center. So we can adjust the degree to which power is centralized or not. We can consolidate, bring things together and put them together in a particular kind of way. If I look back at the years when I've been involved with academic life, it's interesting how much I've been involved in the process of reorganization. My first assignment as a member of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in the State University of New York was to come up with a particular organization plan for anthropology to become a separate entity within sociology. And so I designed that organization. And then the next step was to design an organization for an independent department of anthropology. And so I designed that. And then you go on and look at all the other kinds of things. Organizations have to do with the issue of function and how people work together and what structure will serve that end. Well, I don't need to talk any more about that. Let's talk about the limitations. What are the limitations of the structural approach?
Doesn't take into account people's irrational or non-rational behavior.
Okay. Irrational or non-rational behavior. You can't use organization and structure assume rationality. They assume that everybody's going to work according to their role. And most people don't. It's not that they don't want to, but there are all kinds of other problems, you know? I don't feel well today. And so that affects how things are done. Or the baby was terribly sick last night, and so I didn't get any sleep. And that affects what you do. Or you came in and somebody grabbed you and upset you before you even got to your office, you know, and then you couldn't do the job that you want to do. All of those things are not rational. They are things that have to do with just the way people are and their human needs. Okay, it ignores human need. What else is a limitation? Bob?
I think that there's also excessive rigidity in the high structure, or at least in structure, and that frustrates.
Okay. All right, rigidity. Definitely a problem. Because once people are committed to a structure, and structure seems to be the essence and the solution to all our problems, we deal with it as if it's sacrosanct. And we don't want to change it. We don't want to mess with it. Okay, Murray?
That becomes a kind of a territorialism too.
Okay. All right. Territorial protectionism, okay? Territorial value. All right. What else do they neglect besides human need? Power and conflict. Exactly right. Power and conflict are denied. With the structural approach, you assume that people are not going to struggle for power, and you certainly don't want conflict. The whole idea is to keep things running smoothly. And so you deny conflict, you try to keep it from becoming an important part of your agenda, and you don't then deal with it appropriately. So it ignores the power conflict agenda and tends to eliminate them as key agendas for consideration. Okay, well, let's move on for a few minutes and take a look at the next section, the human resources approach. We could go on and discuss that for probably another half an hour, but you can do that together. If we look at the human resources approach, how does it differ from the structural approach in terms of its assumptions and focus? Okay, the first assumption is human need. Okay, what does it assume about human need? Bob?
The organization exists to serve the human need, where in the structure the organization exists to meet established goals.
Okay, excellent. With a structural approach, the organization exists to meet established goals. But with this approach, the organization exists to meet human need. In other words, there's a very, very different philosophy, very different orientation toward how to make this organization go effectively. Okay? What is the most important resource in the human need approach? People. Exactly. People are the resource. Now, you obviously have other ones, but this approach says that people are the most critical part of the agenda. Okay? What do the human approach people say about organizations and the structure?
I feel like pawns.
Okay?
Under the manipulation of the hierarchy.
Okay, that's right. People are pawns. They're manipulated by the hierarchy. What does that do to them personally then?
Lowers your esteem.
Lowers your esteem. You feel a sense of alienation. You feel like nobody cares about you as a person in that process. So, seems like you empathize with that, Bob. Why do you empathize with that?
Just from experience with work, that at times you're frustrated with the structure and trying to do things and get things done, and you just feel like you're running into walls. And so you just kind of begin to mentally check out and
Okay.
say, well, if they're not going to let me do this, then fine, I'll just put my hours in 8 to 5, get the minimal amount done that I need to get done, and go home.
Okay.
And hopefully find meaning outside of work.
Okay.
But recently I was involved in a project about 6 months ago, which was unique because it was, I want to say, there were new processes done, and all the intervention came from the ground level, from people who were doing the work. And we had a manager who gave us the power to make those decisions, the power to implement them. So work was exciting. People were there 12 hours a day, wanting to do it, because it was new.
Okay. And the excitement came in the newness of it and the fact that you had the freedom to do something that was interesting to
Yeah,
you.
we were solving problems in a new way.
Okay.
That hadn't been done before.
Okay. Now, in the situation you had before, what was significantly different about that?
You weren't given the power to make the decisions.
Okay.
You were just, this is what you do, go do it, come back to me, and you had to go and ask for every little decision to be made.
Okay. All right. Now, Bob has just illustrated in a very graphic way for us the difference between the structural approach and the human resources approach. And in thinking about the human resources approach, this approach really grows out of Maslow's study of human need. What are the key elements in Maslow's study? They become sacred doctrine, even though no one has been able to prove them. Okay, there are levels of need, all right?
The need to belong,
Okay, the need to belong.
safety,
Safety. Okay, what are the lower levels?
psychological,
Physiological.
Physiological needs,
safety needs,
food, safety, those basic issues. But the secondary needs, the higher level needs, what are they?
Love, esteem.
Okay,
Self-esteem.
love, self-esteem, self-actualization. Now, how are you self-actualized, Bob, in this situation where you were working 12 hours a day?
I never understood how to be self-actualized. But what I enjoyed about it was, I don't know, again, it was a sense of that there were, we call it, instead of problems, they were opportunities for solutions.
Okay,
And so you felt that you had a value in contributing to the solutions, and that you were a critical part of the team. And that was communicated to you by the manager, that when you went to his office to talk to him and ask questions, he wouldn't take any phone calls or anything. So your importance was communicated readily.
okay. All right, good, good. Okay, that's excellent, because what that helps us to see is one of the key dimensions of this human resource approach. They assume that the organization needs people and people need each other. So when you go into the manager's office and he closes the door and he won't even take a phone call because you're there, he's communicating to you that he needs you, and that you're an important part of his agenda, and that without you, things aren't going to happen. So that's really a key part of this, the basic underlying philosophy of this whole approach. This approach is one where people have observed exactly what you have described. They've experienced it themselves. They've said, obviously, if we could just do this more, we'd have much more effective organizations. Now, the question is, how do you make that happen? And part of the way you answer that question is you find out what your assumptions are about organizations and about leadership. Do you assume, for example, that effective leadership requires an effective structure? If you do, then you'll act that way. If you assume that effective leadership requires effective relationships with people, then that will change how you act. And it will then help you to set different priorities in terms of what you want to do and how you want to go. As I think about this from a biblical point of view, I'm reminded again and again that the priority that Jesus had was for people. The agenda that he always had out before him was ministering to the people that followed him. And time again, he violated accepted structures on behalf of the people who were there. For example, the structure of the Sabbath. Over and over again, you see him violating that structure. But he also violated the structure of eating. If you remember the number of times that the disciples didn't have time to eat because they were so busy helping people, and the other times when they were in places where there was no food at all and Jesus had to feed them himself, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. As you look through his ministry and his life, he wasn't bound by structure. Now that doesn't mean he didn't use structure, because you'll find, if you examine carefully, that when structure was appropriate, he definitely used it, and he used it well. But he wasn't bound by it. He clearly had an agenda that was focused on the people that he was ministering to and the people that he was discipling. So the human resource approach is not just something that grows out of Maslow's system of felt needs. It's something that's been around much, much longer than Maslow. Maslow just defined it in terms of the way he saw and understood these concepts. It really goes much deeper into human history and human relationships, and understanding the dynamics of successful human relationships often lies in the relationships of the people themselves. And it's this person orientation that is such an important part of it. Now, in terms of thinking about this, there is one other thing that we haven't discussed that we mentioned earlier. I just want to reflect on it one more time before I move on. The structural approach assumes that a good fit equals success. And of course, a bad fit equals failure. If people are not in the right place, if they're not a good fit, then everybody will suffer. And so the whole nature of the fit is a crucial part of the theory of the human resource approach. Okay, let's move on then. Theory X. What is Theory X?
Showing that the manager directly guide or lead the subordinates.
Okay,
Control.
the manager leads. Subordinates follow. All right, that's a good summation of it. In terms of the Theory X, what is their assessment of workers? Okay, they're lazy, right. All right, and being lazy, then can you trust them? No? And what do you have to do to get them to work? Lord it over them, okay? So they need to be beaten. if you're going to get them to work. You know, some way you have to keep pushing them, pressing them. You have to use whatever coercive measures you can to get them to move ahead. In a real sense, this theory of management assumes that workers are like children, that they need to be treated like children, they need to be managed like children, that they need to be corrected like children, they need to be guided in this framework. All right. What are the flaws in this theory, according to the human resources approach?
If you treat a person like that, they'll respond like that.
Okay. You treat them like that, that's how they respond. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right. What else?
As the organization grows, conflicts increase.
Okay.
Because it becomes more impersonal.
Okay, it becomes more and more impersonal. People feel less and less appreciated. The conflict will increase and become much more endemic to the system. Okay. Have you thought about how this works in terms of spiritual discipling of people? You have a new believer. You take a new believer and you treat him like a child. Say, you don't know anything, you're dumb, you know. You have to be in charge. You're very authoritarian about how you disciple. No, there's nothing wrong with bringing them into the authority of the Word of God and teaching them to submit to that authority. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is Theory X discipling. Assuming that your disciples are lazy, they need to be beaten to follow, that they are going to be people who will be deceptive, self-centered, resistant to change. You've got to control them and threaten them to get them to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. Sometimes we use that particular theory to disciple students of Biola. You know, it's tragic, but we've had that.
And that God has given you the authority to take that role
Okay.
over them as well.
Okay. All right. So we want to be careful that we don't let Theory X enter into our sense of what it means to be a Christian leader. Theory Y. Okay, let's talk about Theory Y. What are the assumptions about Theory Y? How does it work?
Motivated, to motivate the experiment to work, to reach the goal.
Okay. You work to get this, you try to bring them into the work task with you. In other words, it becomes more of a bringing them together. I think that's your point, right?
Yeah.
Okay, bring them together. It's bring together the manager and the worker. Instead of the manager leading and the subordinate following, you try to bring them together. There's a sense of they have interests that are mutually beneficial. Okay? In the situation that Bob described, would you say that was a Theory Y situation? Was there more self-control and self-direction? Okay, so we could say self-control, self-direction, okay, were people adults in your context, Bob?
Yeah.
Treated that way? Treated with respect?
Yeah, we weren't assuming, it wasn't assumed that we were passive.
Okay. Definitely not passive. Okay. All right. Good. So in that framework, you have the Theory Y assumes that adults are not passive, that they can be active, that they can be self-directed, they can do their job. What is one of the classic management types of approaches that takes Theory Y as its basis?
Participative management.
Okay, participative management, that's one. That's another. I'm sorry?
Democracy.
Okay, democratic organization. One that we use here at Biola is MBO, management by objectives. Okay, participative organization. All of those are attempts to try to bring people into that process. Now, it can be management by terror, as you had recited in the text, instead of management by objectives. You can just twist that and turn it into an organizational tool. So it really depends an awful lot on how it's utilized. But the whole idea is that you're working with other adults. And so with Theory Y, you treat them as adults. You attempt to bring them into the process, help them make decisions about how it's going to go, let them self-direct in terms of this process, and see them grow and develop in a mutual relationship with one another. Okay. You need to go back and take a look at this again, because Theory Y is discussed at some length with some of its variant forms, and if you're going to be able to discern this as you observe organizations working, to see to the extent that they're effective in this, you need to have an appreciation of that approach. Now in the next chapter, the one on the applying the human resources approach, you have a discussion of Theory Z. And so let's just take a minute and look at Theory Z. What are the key characteristics of Theory Z in terms of understanding the human approach, human resources approach? What's different from Theory Z and Theory Y? Okay, the way they're brought together. How does the management model bring people together in a significantly different way? What's different between the situation Bob described and Theory Z management? How long are people together in Theory Z? Lifetime. Okay. Really, in Theory Z organization, it's a lifetime commitment. Okay. Japanese organizations typically have emphasized belonging to the company for your life. Okay. Not only a lifetime commitment, what about your performance and promotion? How does Theory Z deal with that? You remember?
It's a slower process.
Okay, go ahead.
It's a longer process where evaluation takes over a period of years.
And the interesting thing is there's a diversity in your career path. That's one of the reasons why the process is slower. You do all kinds of jobs. You don't just stay in the same department and get on a fast track to the top. You tend to move around in the organization, learning to know as many of the different facets of the company's work as possible. What about decision making? What kind of decision making is emphasized?
Collective decision.
Okay, collective decision making. Now, why doesn't that go over well with us?
It's too slow.
It's too slow, that's right. It is slow. It takes much more time to do collective decision making. What about the philosophy and culture of the organization?
Strong emphasis. Probably, you must have, to be a lifetime employee, like you're saying that depresses me, thinking about it. But to be a lifetime, you must have a strong, culture, a strong meaning in the company that you're going to be there for a lifetime.
Okay, exactly. The culture becomes a central focus of the company. In other words, there is this sense of meaning and purpose. There's a corporate philosophy, a corporate culture that makes you want to belong there and to be part of it for a long period of time. The interesting part about this is that within this culture, you have an affirmation of the persons and an incredible process of building up their own personal esteem within the corporate group. Sue asked me at the break how the grid and group model connected to this whole thing. Well, the grid and group is really a model of social environment, so effectively it's a model of structure and social structures. And if we were going to use that, it would be part of the structural approach. But what I would say here is that Theory Z organization grows in a strongly corporate social environment. You have to have the lifetime membership, you have the collective operation of the culture. Its decision-making is a slow process. There's a strong emphasis on meaning and the cultural philosophy of the organization. So it would have to be high group and high grid in the corporate structure. It's interesting if we looked at another aspect of this, companies that are very strong emphasizing meaning usually are also high group, because you have to have this commitment to common meaning to be in the high group framework. So you can reflect on that yourselves, and we'll discuss it maybe at a later time. But this theory Z is one that has that focus. All right, let's move on quickly here. What are the advantages of the human resource approach? As we think about this approach, why should you consider this frame as one that's viable for you to employ as you think about leading in an organization yourself and as you look at studying other organizations and their effectiveness? What contributions does this approach make? Okay, people first. Okay, that's great. People first. So the focus on the person is of value. As you listen to Bob, what did you hear him say that it did for him?
He's motivated.
Okay, gave him meaning. Okay, what else?
I think she just said he was motivated.
He was motivated. Yeah, he was really motivated. And a tremendous sense of self-satisfaction out of what he accomplished. So that you can say his job was really enriched for the time he was in that particular project. It was truly would you say it's the most exciting part of the job that you've had?
Yes, I'd say so.
Okay, so it was a very enriching, rewarding experience for you. That's what it can mean if it's done well. In other words, if people are brought together, if they're excited, if they are given the freedom to make their decision, they're self-directed, then they can really grow and be enriched in that process. Participative management is the outcome of this kind of thing. And as you listen to Bob, what role did he have in making decisions? A key role. That's right. The employees were involved. That's what Theory Z is about. Employees have a key role in making decisions. So some of the advantages then are the enrichment of the job. People feel good about their work. There is participation in the management decisions, and they feel much more a part and belonging to it. And you come out with an organization that has a sense of people in it who are working together in a democratic kind of way. Bob.
It also builds loyalty.
Okay, good.
Towards the company, or even towards the manager who you're working for. That you will do anything now to make him look good since he's giving you this chance.
Excellent. Loyalty to company and manager. Okay. Finally, what are some of the limitations? As you look at the shortcomings of this approach, what does it ignore? I'm sorry?
Individual differences.
Okay, individual differences. Good. You have a diversity, and that may be ignored. What else does it ignore?
I think that over time it can lend itself to a kind of almost a groupthink where diversity isn't valued, unity is so significant that there's not room within there for healthy conflict and for healthy wrestling against one another.
This is particularly true of Theory Z, that you really moves you toward a groupthink. And I think this is what you were referring to, that it squashes diversity in that context. So yeah, that's a definite problem. Okay? Anything else you see it ignoring?
It also, as a structural one, it ignores the power and scarcity of materials.
Okay, it definitely does ignore the power and scarcity issues. In focusing on good relationships between people, it doesn't take into consideration the fact that people often are in competition with one another over power and over resources. And so in that process, they're going to struggle with one another in terms of how to accomplish their goals and objectives. So the power scarcity issue is one that is crucial for people in that kind of a framework. Okay, there's one other thing, and with this we'll close. Their assumptions about human nature are that human nature is altruistic and good. Okay? Now, how does that conflict with what we know about human nature?
Selfish.
That's right. God's Word tells us clearly that we are sinners, that by one man sin entered into the world, and it's only by one man that we can be redeemed from that sin. So while the human resources approach is valuable, it ignores some of the key features that we need to understand about the nature of human beings and how we need to respond with that fallen nature. Okay, with that, I think we'll wrap up.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.